Congratulations to everybody who's just joining us. The wonderful Matt Welch is our guest on Szeps Live this evening. Libertarian extraordinaire, commentator, co-host of the Fifth Column podcast, Substack, Media Empire,
yeah,
and delightful guest on Real Time with Bill Maher last week.
Oh, thank you.
Which, Matt, it pains me that all of your best zingers and best arguments with Bill were on the overtime segment that doesn't go to air on HBO but goes on YouTube and I think CNN, and you can get it as a podcast, because I rarely take this opportunity to piss in the pocket of my guests, as we say in Australia, which means to blow smoke up your ass. But thank you for calling out Bill on his environmentalist bullshit, where he was going on about how thankful he is that he was born in that he grew up in the 70s when everything was so much cleaner and there weren't toxins around. And nowadays, kids are just so contaminated by toxins. And you said, but that's nonsense because things are much cleaner than they used to be. And he was like, well, I don't know what kind of science you're talking about.
What kind of libertarian claptrap?
And then he accused you of being deluded by libertarian ideology in believing that, and you were like, well, I can see the mountains from Long Beach, which I couldn't when I was a kid. And he didn't have a response to that.
Yeah, not being from Long Beach, right? He's from New Jersey. He doesn't understand our pain out there in the floodplain of Southern California. No, it's a common thing. For one, Bill, who I obviously enjoy quite a bit, and I'm always happy that he is generous enough to invite me on his show. He has a little bit of kind of some woo-woo environmental stuff. He always has. I mean, he's talking about the plastics and the toxins. And he's also in excellent shape, it must be said. So whatever he's doing, including smoking all of the world's marijuana, seems to be working out for him for the most part. But he's got a little bit of that RFK. I don't know how much he agrees with RFK about anything because I don't follow it that closely. But just sort of that intuition that we're being contaminated by the corporations and that big pharma is trying to push all this kind of stuff. There's some overlap there, and some definitely some skepticism about the efficacy of certain vaccines, not all of them. So he is definitely right for some of that. And I think whether you're coming at it from an RFK angle or the more kind of classic environmental sort of pessimist angle, it's always striking to learn the weird truth about wealth, which is say what you will for wealth, but it makes your air cleaner and your rivers cleaner, and also a reforestation of lands and a bunch of other happy things that happen once you're on the other side of the industrialization curve. And people get there, countries get there for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's going to be because they did the regulation. That's actually part of the story in my native Southern California, is that they cut lead in the car. We no longer have leaded gasoline, and they made some actual environmental regulations. Sometimes it's just people are wealthy enough so that they can demand the regulations, or you're just rich enough that the companies themselves operate a lot cleaner. And for those who think that you got to be a good, solid, commie to go clean, just those of us who were like around the Iron Curtain and around 1990, that was some of the most polluted places. Trees would not grow in northern Bohemia, in then Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic, because of all of the uranium mining that they'd done there and the coal that was everywhere. So yeah, it's better to be clean, and wealth allows for that kind of cleanliness.
It strikes me that this kind of Bill Maher, RFK Jr., like woo-woo rift on the left is a bit reminiscent of another battle that's happening between the sort of Ezra Klein abundance liberals versus the restrictionist liberals, which I think is interesting, Matt. Like that pretty much throughout my life, the left has been associated with a kind of Ralph Nader style conception of what it means to be on the left, which is we should empower communities to push back against powerful companies and governments that want to trammel on their rights. Therefore, we should insert as much red tape and as many impediments to the doing of big business and government as we can. And now that seems to have led, at least America, at least blue state America, to a position in which it's impossible to do anything like build high-speed rail or build skyscrapers or, create affordable housing or whatever it might be, because there's so many pressure points at which self-appointed spokespeople for the community can obstruct. And now there's a renewed energy on the left to say, actually, we should be the party of building things. As a libertarian, what do you make of that clash?
I'm heartened to see that there is a movement among a count them on one hand, maybe two number of blue state left-leaning pundits who've got a nice book out that they're popularizing and starting conversations with. That's great. It's better than the alternative. At the same time, there aren't a lot of elected politicians in this country that are acting anything like any of that. Even a little bit. I mean, there aren't, maybe an abundance Democrat as Jared Polis, the governor of Colorado, but maybe not. I have friends in Colorado who get really mad when I talk about that he's, better than the average Democrat on economic policy. He has signed some things into law that are not so great as well. It's just not, there aren't a lot of great examples of like, oh, we're doing this in this place. Austin seems to be pretty well governed. I don't even know. I presume that the Austin local government is dominated by Democrats, just because Austin tends to be a left of center city. I could be wrong about that, but they build housing there. They have incredible population growth, and the costs are not really going that high in that because they allow for stuff to be built. I'm from, you mentioned Long Beach. So I'm from a part of North Long Beach, right next to a city called Lakewood. Lakewood was the biggest Levittown west of Levittown. They built something like 50,000 houses in a year and a half, 2 years after World War II. It's all incredible. It's this huge kind of planned community, all GI Bill. There's about 3 models of houses, all 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, just depending on like where your porch was. And they just built it all like that. They probably built more houses there in 2 years than have been built in Southern California or in LA County in any given year since, the 90s or something. It's just astonishing. There aren't abundance Democrat kind of examples anywhere. And if there's anything that should make Democrats feel really awful about their governance, is that you mentioned high-speed rail. California has one of the most infamous, pointless and expensive and unbuilt high-speed rail projects that has gone from like Merced to, outer Merced, maybe at this point. And
is there an outer Merced?
Inner, outer.
Great. I want to visit outer Merced. I want to visit the suburban paradise.
If you haven't seen physical graffiti in a while, most of it was shot in Merced. It's a lovely place. I love it. But Florida just went ahead and built a high-speed rail, and it's functional now. Your Ron DeSantis himself, under his governorship, or under the last 2 governorships, this thing was built with mostly private money, if not all private money, and it's up and functional. You can build stuff in Florida. Taxes are low.
But by high-speed rail in an American context, that means 40 miles an hour.
I think it's faster in that case. I don't have the details in front of me, but it's not a joke of high-speed rail. It's okay. Straight. It's straight. There's not a lot of mountains in Florida. There's not stuff in the way. It kind of it's difficult to do that. Like there's only one line on Amtrak that ever makes any money or comes close to it, and it's the one between DC and New York City, or DC and Boston. And people bellyache about there not being high-speed rail, but there's a lot of cities and there's a lot of curves and like rivers and stuff. It's kind of hard to get a thing. And like same thing in California, you've got gigantic mountain ranges all over the place for their high-speed rail projects, but Florida just goes ahead and builds it. Like you drive into, I was talking with my driver, like Thomas L. Friedman, in California, and
was it an Egyptian driver, and were you talking about the fate of the Sisi regime in Cairo? Because that tends to be Thomas Friedman's bread and butter. You parachute
this one was
in
Russian.
For 3 hours.
We weren't talking about Thomas L. Friedman's, the thing you talk about is either the Egyptian in the peace process, or you're talking about how in China you can build things fast. But in this case, it was like the quality of the roads. As soon as you get into the city limits of Los Angeles or the city limits of New York City, and I do a lot of driving between where I'm at in Brooklyn and upstate New York, a couple hours away, And it's like you drive in and it's welcome to the Bronx, chunk, chunk, chunk. You just start like, it's like you're on the airport road to Sarajevo in 1994, just like dodging sniper fire and gigantic bombed out craters. It's incredible. So you're paying all these taxes. Nothing works. All the infrastructure sucks and you can't build anything. So long story short, I'm glad they're talking about it. It beats the alternative not talking about it. And there isn't any real evidence that I've seen on the ground that this is changing the basic dynamics of especially state and local democratic governance. I think one of the ills of American politics for the last 10, 15 years is that everyone just thinks about the presidency. Everybody thinks about the federal government. And so they can tell themselves, including my tribe, such as I have one, just sort of independents and small L libertarians, they sometimes say, "Oh, it's the uniparty that all agrees with each other about something." And there's something to that critique, although it's overly simplified. But on the state and local level, there's actual pretty big difference in the way these things are governed. This came to the fore, especially about all things related to COVID. If you were a heavily democratic place, you had heavy lockdowns, you had heavy vaccine mandates. It's just basically Australia. Your schools were closed. There's a lot of.
Don't throw us in. Don't throw us in with that.
I'm gonna just throw you forever because it's fun.
When you go back, we've revisited the data recently on a very interesting episode that I did with an economist about comparing the metrics of various countries. And for the majority of Australians throughout the majority of the pandemic, there were no lockdowns, schools were open, and then at the very end, when we fucked up the vaccine rollout, there was like a 100-day period long after the rest of the world had forgotten about COVID.
If I would have tried to visit you, you would put me in a concentration camp for like 3 weeks first, right?
You'd say, you would have to go to Auschwitz, but only for 15 days. And then once you were out of Auschwitz,
that's all I'm saying. But no,
I asked David Frum about the claims of hysterical idiots online like Tim Pool, who were calling Australia's quarantine facilities for inbound travelers returning home concentration camps. And David Frum said, "I'll tell you how you can tell whether something's a concentration camp. Are there pillows?"
Fair enough. Anyways,
at the risk. Sorry.
No, go on. I believe it's your show.
I was going to say, at the risk of being Thomas L. Friedman on you, I just got back from Japan.
Yeah.
And on the point of you saying that it's difficult to build high-speed rail in the Northeastern Corridor in the United States because there are rivers and mountains, I did take the Shinkansen from Tokyo to Osaka, and they are currently building, in addition to the Shinkansen, a maglev between those two cities, which is not impossibly expensive and, will actually be successful. And, if you know anything about the geography of Japan, there are rivers and there are definitely mountains. So it's possible.
Yeah, in New York, I think the cost per subway track mile is something like twice as expensive as the next most expensive subway system in the world. It is astonishing. The New York Times ran a great 3 or 4 part series about 5 years ago. I think it was pre-COVID. About the dysfunction in that system. And it's all that, just, when there's guaranteed revenue streams or the perception of guaranteed revenue streams in American politics, people, and maybe this is true everywhere, but it seems to be heavily true in America these days, people just treat it as like a feather bedding system rather than we're going to build this. You would have, I remember Barack Obama, when he was president, was like, we used to build Golden Gate bridges. Why don't we do that anymore? And it's true, but it's also true that the federal government didn't build a Golden Gate Bridge, and that's kind of part of it. There weren't
right, but who did? It wasn't a private consortium, right?
There was actually a lot of private actors helping to build the Golden Gate Bridge. You're right, it wasn't a fully private project, but it was. It's been a while since I looked into this and wrote about it, but I did at the time, and there was like 5 different actors involved, and some of them were Bank of America or local or Wells Fargo, I forget which, acting more on their own. You can't build big things. There's both state environmental review and national environmental review things that are designed to gum things up. It's interesting you mentioned Nader earlier, whose presidential campaign in 2000 I covered, and I remember the first press conference I saw him at, I was just struck by how many times he used the word corporate or corporation. And I just started it was running a tally. And I think it was like 63 times in like a 25-minute thing. It's like, wow, just using the C word, dropping C bombs all the time. But Nader in the 70s was a bit more complicated than all that. Like Nader was a force for deregulation in America. He was part of the conversation about deregulating airlines. He saw the dangers of having the government enforce kind of cartel arrangements with companies, and he would see them sort of cementing the corporate power that he does not like. So he had this just odd bedfellows that could exist in 1970s American politics, but could not by the late 80s, where Teddy Kennedy was part of that. A part of the deregulation thing. Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, in I think the only real debate that they had, presidential debate, they were just like arguing which one was the bigger deregulator. It was like crazy. Like we don't think about that because we see the end of it when deregulation was seen as this sort of Thatcher Reagan evil right-wing plot or whatever, or fantastic liberation against the commies. But it was more mixed than all of that at the dawn of all of that activity in the 70s.
One of our viewers on Substack Live, and a big hello to everybody. I'm Josh Szeps. I'm here with Matt Welch. There's a Szeps Live. We do it every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, US time. This will also go out as an episode of Uncomfortable Conversations, my podcast, which is different from the live stream, but you should subscribe to anyway. You know how to do that. You're already on Substack. And Matt, one of the listeners, Nell, just chimed in saying, is the labor force in Japan local or are they migrants? And I'm pretty sure that in Japan, the people who are building the maglev are Japanese people. They don't have a policy of importing migrants, I don't think, for big infrastructure projects, which raises the question, why is American infrastructure so diabolically expensive? Do we even know that? I mean, presumably it's not like American union workers earn more than French union workers. Well, maybe they do.
They probably do on average. I'm just guessing. No, it's a lot of made in America stuff, a lot of rules and regulations. The MTA here in New York City, their average salary is a lot. It's a whole lot. I again, just sort of like the bigger the city, the more like semi-successful it is. And New York goes through periods of success and failure, but it's not like a Detroit or St. Louis. It's not in terminal decline. Then the barnacles can attach to it. From what I understand about Japan, which is basically nothing. So, but that they haven't had a large foreign-based immigration, or certainly not that don't necessarily welcome foreigners with open arms culturally.
No, that's right.
Or numerically. You can't build in New York City. You're going to have immigrants no matter what, but it's not like you're going to go to the local Home Depot and hire some dudes to go lay some track for the MTA. Those are all really good union jobs. So that's part of the reason, but it's also just to do everything in New York is expensive. You've got to get it inspected. You've got to, in many cases use eminent domain or buy this guy out. It's a notoriously tricky piece of land to try to get anything done on.
But that doesn't explain why it's difficult to build high-speed rail in Merced, California, because nobody lives
Well, there's
there.
No reason to build high-speed rail in Merced, California, to be absolutely clear. No, I mean, high-speed rail I can't speak for China. I haven't ever been to Asia in my life, so I mean, it's all pure ignorance on my part. But I have spent a lot of time in France, and the high-speed rail that people like to talk about and compare to is the TGV, which is lovely, especially the one between Lyon and Paris, which is their version of the, hey, DC to New York or DC to Boston sure works. Why isn't the rest of the world like this? Well, Lyon to Paris is a straight shot, and there isn't a lot of terrain in trouble, and it's the two biggest population centers, and people do work, and you can get going pretty fast, and you can commute, pretty much.
But I don't buy this, Matt. The problem is not a geographical problem in America. There are lots of mountainous places in Europe that have high-speed rail, in Switzerland and in Bavaria and in northern Italy. There's Japan. It's more complicated to build a train between DC and Boston than it is across the plains of Texas. That's a fair comparison. But that's not the principal obstacle that's causing things to be twice or three times as expensive.
There's not, I mean, so there's the expensive part, and then there's just there's no reason for this to be built part, which are kind of related. In California, part of the expense is that you have a lot of earthquakes. I know you have earthquakes in Japan too. The mountains are not nothing. The Tehachapi Range is a mountain range, as is the coastal range that you have to get through. And no matter what you do, I think right now there's a project that is being contemplated or worked on between LA and Las Vegas, which kind of makes more sense actually, because those are places that people want to go really fast. And there's, the only other way to get there with any kind of speed is on airplane, but there's no way to get to a place that you want to be in LA and a place you want to be in the Bay Area by train, even the most perfect imaginary train you can imagine, where the time and the money for the ticket would be remotely worth it. So even if the cost was good, if they wouldn't have enough ridership to be able to justify the building of it and all the assumptions that are based into.
But why do you assume that that's true? It strikes me as a perfect distance, which is it's just far enough to be, to need to get to quickly, and you don't want to drive, but it's close enough that flying is still a pain in the arse. There's not enough people going back and forth. If you could do it in an hour and 45 minutes or 2 hours or whatever it would be if you were traveling at 250 miles an hour.
You're just not going to get from downtown LA to downtown San Francisco in 2 hours. If you could, then it'd be a more interesting project, but that cannot physically happen. And there's not enough of a population that's going to and fro. Las Vegas and LA, that's a big population every single weekend, right? There's a lot of motivated customers who want to do that. And there's basically only two ways, and both of them kind of suck in their own way. And there's a lot of no man's land. There aren't there aren't farmers that you have to buy out. There isn't a complicated, nearly as common. There are mountains, but there's also a lot of empty space there. So it's easier to deal and work in empty space between larger population centers that are motivated to go to and from. There's not a huge daily traffic number going from the Bay Area to Southern California. It's sizable, but it's not enough to support the amount of time that it would take to go back and forth. The ridership numbers just aren't remotely close enough.
I'm skeptical. There's a lot of lift. There's a lot of airlift between those cities, and it may not be 2 hours, but it's not going to be more than 2.5 hours or something. Isn't it like a 6-hour drive or a 7-hour drive?
You have to haul ass to go 5.5, 6 hours.
Yeah. So if a train is going 4 times faster than a car does.
Yes, I'm taking the under on that being what the final destination is, because
just sounds to me like a conversation that I have a lot with Americans, which is that they bank the wins that American audacity and ingenuity provides in areas of technology, military prowess, innovation, and then they make excuses for the failings about the things that America doesn't do well, like the healthcare system or like infrastructure. And if you gave a different example, if you just imagined a scenario in which the Elon Musks and Thomas Edisons of the world had created incredible high-speed rail, and it was Europe that was doing really good AI and tech stuff, I can imagine a different version of you making excuses about why, there was something specific to the European condition that made it more conducive to technology, and why trains were easier to construct in the United States because it's big, it has large population centers, and so on and so forth. It just sounds like excuse making, frankly. And if Elon Musk really wanted to build high-speed rail, and if the legislative and regulatory framework were in place for it to do so, there's no reason why the San Andreas Mountains would be an impediment.
I think he had a boring project idea to go through some of those mountains, build a gigantic tunnel. And look, I would love first of all, I'd like him to get out of government, and which I think is going to happen by the end of this podcast anyways. But I would love for him to work on that. But part of the problem in California is that you can't have that amount of private sector involvement in a big project. Every government has to get their fingerprints on it, and that makes everything more expensive as well. So in the Florida case, not just for the high-speed rail there, but a lot of the building of highway system in Florida, which is big and it works pretty well, is that a lot of that's been private. If California allowed for more of that, and I think that if I'm not mistaken, you're forcing me to talk out of my ass a lot here, but I'm going on memory.
That's my job.
I think that the LA to Vegas thing is much more kind of private concept than being like top down kind of a government thing. So I would give it more of a chance to succeed. I think technologically we can do all kinds of great stuff, but government managed technology is not working. Think about space. I mean, you mentioned Elon Musk, not Jeff Bezos, and all these other people. I remember arguing with the late Lou Dobbs on the Red Eye program on Fox News during the Obama
God
era.
rest his soul.
God rest his soul. Because one of the topics was some jackass like rock singer was talking about going to the moon or said something silly about that. And I was on a panel with Lou Dobbs, and I'm old enough in media years to remember back when Lou made a desperate gambit to a desperate lunge for that early .com money, and he went from CNN to space.com. and so like Lou started his like answer to the question by trying to dig Barack Obama. And I said something along the lines of like, far be it for me to step on the toes of the founder of space.com. But one of the few things that I genuinely appreciate about Barack Obama's presidency is that he unlocked the ability for private industry to go to space. He said, okay, let's have private industry help with NASA to deliver payloads. They removed a lot of the kind of monopolistic NASA stuff. And we see the fruits now. Like we are starting to do those big, insane dreams again. And a lot of that stuff the path was cleared by Obama so that people could actually start doing those things. So if we allowed people to do things, solve all the problems, it'd be great.
Before we leave the subject of high-speed rail, Matt, one of our viewers on Substack Live, Alex, has this insightful question for me. Alex says, hey, Vegemite breath, where's the train from Sydney to Perth if they're so easy to build? So Sydney to Perth is not a good candidate because it's the same distance as like New York to Los Angeles. It's too far. Flying is better for those distances. The better own, if you wanted to own me, would be where is the train from like Sydney to Melbourne, which is true. There should be one, and there isn't. And I'm not saying that Australia is great at this stuff either. But there should be a train from Sydney to Melbourne. I mean, there is a train. It takes 12 hours. It should take 4 hours. There should certainly be a fast train from Sydney to Canberra, which is currently, get this, Matt, just in case anyone thinks that I'm like lauding my Australianness over inferior Americans. The drive from Sydney to Canberra, the nation's capital, is a 3-hour drive, and the train takes 4.5 hours. So mea culpa, okay? Another person, and also before we leave this whole thing about abundance and why America can't do things and start talking about the fascist authoritarian takeover of your fine United States, you mentioned Elon. So there is this interesting thing on the left, which is this battle between obstructionists who want to preserve communities and the environment and put impediments in the place of what others might conceive of as being progress, versus the abundance agenda. But then on the right, there is also this conflict between I suppose, a populist, working class oriented, like let's get things working for the heartland again agenda, which it strikes me would actually need government to function and would need government to be deft at empowering the working class and the poor, against what seems to be the Elon Musk attitude of like Al Franken used to have a saying about Republicans, which is that Republicans get elected on the platform that government doesn't work, and then when they're in office, they prove it. And it strikes me like you need a certain amount of government functionality in order to have to get government out of your life. It's not enough to just rip it apart and expect it to be benign. When you rip it apart, often you end up with the rules without the human mind to interpret those rules, and you get what the Soviets called a face-eating machine, which is just like a mindless bureaucracy that ruins your life without any way of actually engaging with it, the DMV or the IRS. What do you make of what is the best case for what Elon is doing, and how could it be better?
Well, I think that what he has ended up doing is, instead of having a Department of Government Efficiency, it's more like the Department of Government Disruption. It's how can we use sometimes technological tools, sometimes just hey, let's change this rule and kind of do this, or just pull the rug out under an entire agency. They are more like attacking perceived strongholds on the left, perceived and actual, in many cases, strongholds on the left in ways that gets people on their heels and like, what? So they're disrupting business as usual. I would again point to the gap between national Republicans and local Republicans, where there is much more of a focus on how do we get stuff done actually, how do we work efficiently, and be more like a Mitch Daniels as the governor of Indiana than as Elon Musk sort of jumping around the federal government. As part of that, I had a pretty early intuition that we wouldn't be getting a lot of actual sort of efficiency style reforms, by the fact that I'm now old enough. I don't know, 25 people that you would definitely tab if you were serious about, like, oh, here's someone who's been thinking on the problem of government efficiency and doing a lot more effectively and with less. And they've been thinking about this and working on this and actually getting some wins here and there sometimes for the last 25, 30 years. They're obvious people. Let's go to them. He's gone to zero. He's gone to absolutely zero. One I would name that I work with at Reason, who's been here for 50 years and helped work on airline deregulation and transportation issues, high-speed rail too. Bob Poole. Like, you would just hire Bob Poole, or you would consult him and figure out what his ideas. You would go to people who work at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. People have been working, at AEI, other places. It's not just that they've been twiddling their thumbs at sinecures in Washington and accomplishing nothing. They actually have been thinking on these problems in a productive way. I don't think that there has been much, if any, expressed interest in any of those people and their work. And those have been some of the more strenuous critics, not even like, oh, we've been frozen out. It's just like, dude, there's so much you could be doing right now. We want this to work. We are the target audience for it. And also we could be henchmen for it. And they are not interested in that. I think they're more interested in punching the left in the mouth. Occasionally I might be interested in some of those actions. Maybe it's going to lead to things that are good. It's really hard to say because he's not transparent, and Musk in particular is a really horrible communicator every day of his life. But I just don't see the government becoming more efficient because of this, and certainly not and measurably smaller, which is another concern that I have at a time that we're just a few years away from what is looking like a debt crisis.
Nate makes an interesting point in the chat, in the Substack Live comments, Matt, saying the abundance faction, meaning we were talking about the left's battle between restrictionists, Ralph Nader style people who want to put impediments to progress versus the Ezra Klein abundance agenda. Nate says the abundance faction is a relatively new phenomenon. I think this is in response to you, Matt, saying that it is still a vanishingly small proportion of the Democratic Party. Nate says the MAGA takeover of the GOP took nearly a decade to complete. If abundance Democrats are going to wrest control of blue state party governance, that will likely take a decade plus to complete the cycle. So we can be hopeful. Let's talk about human rights. Do you want to jump in on that, Matt?
Yeah, just that there aren't a lot of notable ideological takeovers that have originated in opinion journalism. Much as it pains me, much as I would have perhaps liked to do one myself, I don't know. Although I'm not interested in power. Politics in America stubbornly happens at the consumer level, and I'm not sure that there is. I wish them all the success in the world, but I think that's a little bit different than what Donald Trump's been doing.
DJB writes in the comments. Clive James had a relevant quote to this topic of government bureaucracy. He said, "It's only when they go wrong that machines remind you how powerful they are." What great Australian, great Australian. Flip says on the in the comment, you, by the way, you don't. I can't suffer the ignominy of you holding your fingers to your ear. So don't even bother. Just give up. Just take one out and put it near your mouth.
You're the one who's been trying to make me look this ridiculous. And congratulations, the humiliation ritual. You're doing to me what Donald Trump did to Paul Ryan 10 years ago.
I appreciate it. Flip says, can you guys get into the whole Trump will patently be a disaster versus the relax the guardrails will hold perspectives pre-election? Matt and his co-podcasters downplayed the threat, whereas others like Josh felt it was fairly clear it would be really, really bad. Obviously, hindsight is 20/20, but would like to hear both your takes on how it's going and what you got wrong or right. Flip, I appreciate your throwing Matt under the bus like that and referring to my perspicaciousness, foresight, soothsayer-like abilities. Matt, defend yourself.
Yeah, I would commend people who are interested in my record, which won't be a lot of people, but I wrote, I think on the election day or the day before, the frustratingly unknown stakes of election 2024. And the thing that I pointed to that was unknown with Trump was not his desires, which I think stated plainly, he's going to get his tariffs and he's going to do things that shock the conscious on immigration. What is unknown is the guardrails question, particularly in light of the Supreme Court giving the president kind of a lot of power to do crimes, while he's presidenting. And also the sort of question of the type of staffing infrastructure and how people would be setting it up so that they wouldn't have as many obstructions as they did in the first 100 days of his first election. I had no illusions about that he would do these things. I am perhaps surprised by some of the velocity on kind of the DOGE or ending USAID. But I wouldn't describe what I have said about Trump to be downplaying at all. I wrote a cover story for Reason magazine in front of the 2020 election under the headline, "The Case Against Donald Trump." When he first escalated into
Tell
our
us
lives.
What you really think, though, Matt. Stop beating around the bush.
I think that he is a malign force in American and global politics. He's also a response that he's a tool that people use to express their real and deserved indignation at how the elites have screwed up as well. So I think it's a little bit more complicated than pointing to him and saying, he's going to be the embodiment of the worst adjective I can think of a politician throughout human history. I don't think that I downplayed or used the word guardrails to describe something that was around him. It's part of the disquiet in advance of the election was like, okay, guardrails look different this time. And he looks a little bit more seasoned, and he has been running more vociferously and specifically about tariffs in particular, which is something that I care about, than he did previously. So it looks like he's serious with it. So, I can only speak for what I have done, but I don't think that it has been to minimize the latitude that he has had, latitude that he himself helped expand and the Supreme Court helped expand. And then Joe Biden helped expand too.
In the Substack Live questions, Jack says, would the US and by extension the world be better off now if Kamala Harris had won?
I think so. I was rooting for that to be the outcome. I didn't vote for her. I live in a state where my vote doesn't matter. She was going to win no matter what I did. I had no enthusiasm about her. I don't think she's a good candidate or a good politician or a good person. And I think many of her policies, to the very limited extent we knew about any of them, were not great. But so I think that it's a worse thing to bust up the entire global trading system than whatever she was going to do. But she would have been a holding pattern, like Biden was a holding pattern, this sort of exhausted, faded memory of a post-World War II America-led order that no one really believes in anymore, at a time when there's just kind of a lot of understandable societal disquiet and feeling of alienation from the elites who govern over you. So, it would have been in its own way also very bad, I think. But Trump is using power more aggressively, I think, than she would ever have done, and in ways that I perhaps idiosyncratically do not like.
The extraordinary thing about Trump is that he's so much focused on American greatness, yet from my perspective as a friendly foreigner from a medium-sized ally, it strikes me that he's doing exactly what you would do if you wanted to accelerate American global decline by relinquishing America's role on the world stage, basically forcing allies to figure out a way of doing business around, forget about the economics. Let's just think about national security and Ukraine and the fate of Central and Eastern Europe. Europe is going to come together and probably extend the British and French nuclear umbrella to a kind of mini NATO across the European continent. Countries like Australia and South Korea and Japan and India are going to form their own alliances. We already have a thing called the Quad between Japan and India and Australia and the US, which we can continue without the US on a sort of multilateral ad hoc basis for our own security. In terms of the US dollar, they are dramatically reducing faith in the US dollar. The bond markets obviously are becoming less confident in the American economy and in the credibility of American guarantees about future payouts. So it's like, I don't quite get it. I don't quite get the connection between the rhetoric about American greatness and the practical insularity of the outlook, which embodies a kind of withdrawal from international leadership. Can you reconcile those for me?
Yeah. First of all, you're globalist cuck, so that kind of explains a lot. Second, he has a theory of the case. His theory of the case is that that the global trading order, the thing that America designed after World War II and made very copacetic for American interests in many different ways, placed it at the center of the universe. That whatever it started to be, it has become a system for the world to rip us off, and to do bad deals, and to take us for granted, and to snipe at us, no matter what we do. That part is true, and it is. And that once we go through a certain restructuring, we are going to have a more kind of 1900-esque economy.
Sorry to interrupt you again, Matt, but I'm looking at the comments, and it's just funny how so many people are focused on the positioning of the earbuds, and I want to pander to them. Position the long bit downwards, so they're pointing down, vertically down, away from. Yeah,
I want you to publish our text string, which I use the word fiasco about 75 times, and
before we went live, Matt was prescient. He was like, this whole thing's gonna fuck up because it's not gonna. But now success. Look, Tim just said, and someone else said, the solution is to put the earbuds in the trash, which I think is also a good
absolutely
solution. But
correct.
Here's the thing. To people who are just tuning in, the wonderful Matt Welch is joining us of the Fifth Column. You might have seen him on Real Time with Bill Maher last weekend. We gather together with a fascinating person like Matt every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern or Wednesday daytime Australian time. And if you don't subscribe to my podcast, Uncomfortable Conversations, you should do so, because this will come out crisp, clean audio. See that mic in front of Matt? It's capturing every little fart, every sniffle, every ASMR mouth noise is going straight into the podcast, which will be released on Thursday, and you'll be able to hear it then. But if you're tuning in live, Matt now has, thanks to the crowdsourcing of our wise viewers, his AirPods in correctly and continuing to hold the floor. Hold the floor. Take it away.
And 8% on my phone, so this is not going to last much longer. Anyways,
I can't be held responsible for that.
Yeah, why not? No, he just thinks that at the end of this, once we've restructured that those factory jobs are coming back to America, and that we're going to build bigger, and that the world won't be able to rip us off anymore, and it's all going to work out. There aren't many economists not named Peter Navarro, who of course is not an economist, who believe that, but he does. And he thinks that tariffs can make you rich and can make it great. So in his idea, we're sort of ripping the Band-Aid off of the soft American empire, because it created all these distortions and allowed China to get rich at our expense, and allowed flabby Western European countries to kind of coast under our security umbrella, which again is true, and people to snipe at us and somehow take advantage of us by buying all of our dollars or investing in our country as much as they have. So again, I think he's wrong, but I think he has a theory about it, and
that's fine. But it's not a theory of American greatness. It's a theory of American complaint about being taken advantage of, and therefore we should hunker down, close the shutters, focus on ourselves. Like it's America as Switzerland. It's not America as empire.
First of all, Switzerland's awesome. You take that back. And second of all, it is based on a lot of complaint. I think he just thinks that, that the same system where we have, or had until recently, half of the world's capital markets money, and most of the world's best universities and all this kind of ferments and technological development that makes Europe look like a backwater, that will go on after we break bonds with the empire that we created. And that is a reality that I think more and more of his advisors are saying, hey, I'm not sure this is working. We got to back down from China now. It's that vision's is not paying off. And we aren't even at the place yet where the tariffs have really hit consumers. They're going to, sooner rather than later. It's going to hit them probably in their workplaces before it hits their pocketbook. But
what does that mean, Matt?
It just means that the stuff on order the prices haven't really risen too much yet, but they're going to.
When you say that it'll hit them in the workplace before their pocketbook, what's that distinction?
Truckers don't have jobs. They don't have anything to ship. The LA ports are already down. I think LA Long Beach port is already down about 20%. Not that everything is that, but 2/3 of the imports that we get in this country are used in American manufacturing, and those manufacturers, facing investment uncertainty and facing inputs being way more expensive, especially if they're from China or Canada, are suspending orders. Our tourism is way down; it's fallen off a cliff in February and March already. And
that probably has less to do with tariffs and more to do with a lot of the chatter that I see on forums and tourism sources here in Australia, which is about people's anxiety about going through airports and stuff, and being not being a citizen and being snatched and then finding yourself in some El Salvadorian prison or some shit.
Yes. The way that it has to do with tariffs is just that as part of the tariff conversation, Trump has repeatedly demeaned Canada. Canada, unhelpfully in this context, is the greatest single source of foreign tourists. And I think they've cut their visits down by like 50% overnight. Yeah. So the tourism industry is absolutely reeling.
Matt, you've been talking a lot about tariffs, but to be honest, the thing that alarms me the most and that I failed to predict the most was the extent of Trump's trammeling of habeas corpus and individual liberties, I suppose, and the ability of Republicans to go along with that, the party that is supposed to care about individual rights, and the looming showdown with the courts. Even I didn't think that it would get this dire this fast, but the idea that, to Americans who don't know what it's like to be on a green card in the States, I should say, once you're on a green card, when I transitioned from my temporary work visa to a green card, as far as I was concerned, I was functionally a citizen who couldn't vote. I mean, I thought, you're a permanent resident. I talked to my immigration attorney about it, and I was like, is there any reason to eventually go for citizenship? And he was like, not really. I mean, there's no practical benefit to being a citizen. Like, he was like, you can come and go. You can use the residence lane at the airport. You can You can do everything that a citizen can do if you've got a green card. You won't get the consular protection if you're, locked up abroad or something. Then the US government won't go into bat for you. But I was like, well, the Australian government would go into bat for me anyway, so there's no real difference. Now I'm hearing green cards and permanent residency status being kind of poo-pooed as if it's just you're here at the whim of the State Department, so don't be surprised if we kick you out for no reason. And oh, by the way, we may even kick you out to a foreign prison that we pay you to go to and that we pay for your residency at. And when a court requires us to facilitate your return to the country, our answer will be, we are facilitating it because if the country that we're paying to incarcerate you somehow returns you to the border, we will not turn you away. Like, that's, to me, a foundational constitutional crisis moment in a sense in which, like, tariff policy is not.
It's dark. It's dark. Yeah, I mean, tariff policy is a constitutional problem in that the Constitution spells out the power to levy taxes and tariffs in the Congress, and Congress is just like, maybe not. So that
just tends to be Congress's attitude towards everything.
Correct. That's been trending in that direction for a long time. But this is Trump telling the Supreme Court to get stuffed while spiriting away residents of the U.S. Just kind of willy-nilly based on Lord knows what legal justification. And then, Marco Rubio combing through the op-eds of every college newspaper in the country to deport hundreds of people on student visas. There's even been secret revocations of people's visa status. They thought they were legal, but somewhere in secret they were made illegal and then bounce out of the country at a time when their wife's in the hospital giving birth. There was a U.S. citizen in Arizona was Hispanic guy, pulled over by cops and sent to an immigration detention center for 10 days because he didn't have his ID. We haven't been a papers, please country up until now, but now they're starting to do that. And he was.
But also, let me just separate. I just want to clarify, Matt, the sharp line that I, as someone who comes from a liberal democracy that has an incredibly harsh immigration policy, see between a harsh, uncaring immigration policy and secreting people away into black vans and sending them to black site gulags in foreign countries without a trial. These are very different things, and I don't think that Americans should make the mistake of getting them confused. If you want to boot someone on a student visa out of the country, be my guest. It might be harsh, but that's any country's right. If you want to change someone's immigration status, if they're not a permanent resident, that's any country's right. Put me on a plane and fly me back to my homeland if you must. If I try to enter illegally, you can even do what Australia does and force me away from the border and lock me up indefinitely in a concentration camp on a Pacific desert island while my case is being processed. Again, not nice, but within the rights of a liberal democratic country to decide how people are going to enter its sovereign territory. What is not okay is for someone who is on your sovereign territory, for whom you have a duty of care, to, without a trial, with no respect for habeas corpus, with no respect for rights that go back to the Magna Carta 1,000 years ago, to simply lock them up and throw away the key and wipe your hands of them and disavow any responsibility for it because they are now no longer in your possession. That is fucking Pinochet stuff, and it has nothing to do with immigration policy. It has everything to do with what I regard as a massive, dangerous line that's being crossed.
The way that
I'm wrong.
I'm not. The way that it has to do with immigration policy is that it's being done in the name of immigration policy, and the thing that civil libertarians have been trying to point out to Americans who are more immigration restrictionists is that when you crack down, and you crack down in I don't care if I'm coloring outside the lines type of way on immigration, and for instance, you get blasé about due process as part of that, you are going to get American citizens caught up, and that is already beginning to happen. And Americans will discover that far too late in this process. They think you can hermetically seal it off, say, well, what part of breaking law didn't they understand, and just sort of shrug that they're being sent to foreign black site prisons. It's a dark place that we are at right now, and it's an open question. It is clear that the administration, if they wanted to, they could bring back Garcia from El Salvador and deport him to literally any other country. It would be over in a second. He is a deportable by law. They could do that. They're choosing instead to fight against the Supreme Court because they want the latitude to be able to do this. And Trump said with Bukele's presence at the White House, like, wouldn't it be great if we could do this to Americans too? Like, you should build more prisons for us. Let's go. He's got this sense of he wants to expand his authority. Marco Rubio is expanding his authority. Again, not necessarily black prisons sites, but doing it in a way that's antithetical to American values by targeting people for their speech, for their political, nonviolent, not doing anything else wrong speech. They're expressing opinions and they're being bounced too because the law is overbroad, giving Marco Rubio power. It's all of a piece, but you're right that one piece of it is particularly dark right now. So there's a lot of people with sort of their claws on the chalkboard, waiting to see what comes next. And it's just clear Trump is relishing this fight because he has the intuition that the fight is going to give him more power. And he believes, and I think he believes wrongly, that the American public is going to be behind him in the name of wanting to be hard on immigration and more robust policing the borders, that they're not going to care about violating due process, running over the Supreme Court, and sending people to an authoritarian hellhole prison.
I can see in the comments on Substack Live, some people are saying, well, yeah, but it was anti-Semitic speech that these people are guilty of. Yeah, so what? In America, you're allowed to be an anti-Semite. You're allowed to say whatever you want. And other
Why do you think we let Josh
Pinochet was a killer. Don't people are saying, don't compare it to Pinochet. Pinochet was a killer. Well, what do you think goes on in an El Salvadorian prison for terrorists, if not occasional murder as well? It's certainly reckless. If someone who the United States sends to that prison ends up dying in it prematurely, that may not be direct murder, but it's certainly manslaughter of a kind, or reckless disregard for their life. I just don't want, Matt, this conversation to have any ability to land in the minds of Republican-leaning Americans as being similar to the discourse about there is no such thing as an illegal, and ICE is a criminal enterprise, and we shouldn't be deporting people, and children in cages. It's got nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah,
it's got nothing to do with deporting people. It's got to do with incarcerating people without a trial. Deport who you want, but you can't lock them. You can't pay for them to be locked up in a foreign jail
and then
with
pretend
no
that
recourse and no appeal, and
then pretend you have
no any control over it.
That you've washed your hands over it. No, it's absolutely dark and bad business, and I don't think that Americans are ultimately going to stand by it. Like, more than 80% of Americans are against the president defying Supreme Court orders, even if he doesn't like them. We don't like it when we deport. We want to deport illegal immigrants, especially criminals, but we don't want to deport people who have jobs and U.S. citizen families. So I think that there is going to be a public opinion break on this, even if elected Republicans do absolutely nothing.
Another person says in the Substack Live chat, what they're doing is equivalent. They're talking about the El Salvadorian prison is equivalent to Australia's refugee islands. Whilst I oppose Australia's refugee islands, the way in terms of the harshness of the way they're used, and just to clarify for people who don't know, Australia has a policy that if you try to arrive here illegally by boat, the Navy will intercept you before you reach Australian shores, and we basically bribe small neighboring countries, namely Nauru and Papua New Guinea, to let us build prisons on them where the people are processed and then and you will never set foot in Australia. You will be repatriated to friendly countries if you're a refugee, or sent back home if your case is found not to be a refugee. The difference is those people are being intercepted before they get to the country, and they're aware of the risk when they get on the boat that they're never going to get to Australia. The difference between what Australia does and what President Trump is doing is, A, it's not taking place on Australian soil, and B, it's happening to people who are making a very conscious choice to come illegally and who know all of the legal perils that might put them in. It's a different thing. I mean, the whole point of intercepting the boats off Australian shores is so that they're not yet in our duty of care, and that we don't. It may seem like a distinction without a difference to a libertarian, but I do think it makes a difference whether or not a person is wandering around in your country with an expectation that their human rights are going to be respected versus making a hazardous journey across oceans, with all of the perils that entails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As always in America, I think half or so of our illegal immigrants are people who came here legally, which is also a distinction that people sometimes lose. They think everything is just a border crossing illegally through a river or a boat or something.
Yeah, right.
Not the case.
What happens with the courts now, Matt, and how concerned are you, and what would you like to see the courts do in the extent to which they push back? I ask this because there are a few schools of thought. One school of thought is the cautious one, which says the courts should try to play Trump and sort of kind of retroactively make it seem like Trump is doing what they ask him to do, and be as generous as possible towards extending to the administration as much of a benefit of the doubt as they can in order to avoid an overt confrontation, because they know that the worst thing that could happen to the credibility of the court would be the executive to defy it overtly and create a constitutional crisis. Another school of thought says that the Supreme Court should go full Harvard and stand up to him and call his bluff and bring it on.
Yeah. I mean, the rulings so far have been pretty 9-0, and 7-2 was the most recent one. I think the midnight injunction about deportations under the Alien Enemies Act from 1798. So Damon Root had a good piece of reason, many time guest on the Fifth Column, legal analyst, great author, where he pointed out that, the Supreme Court under our division of government, it doesn't have any guns. It can't make you do anything ultimately. And there have been times in American history where the Supreme Court come up with a big ruling, Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, being probably among the most famous, to desegregate schools, and the people with guns, in this case George Wallace, said in Alabama, like, no, we're going to take that one under advisement, and nope, we're not going to do it. And what happens in that case? There's massive resistance against this on the state level, and eventually, yes, there was federal troops that were sent down, but there was a big public opinion swing that came with it, especially when people saw the brutality of the resistance of it against nonviolent Black school children and protesters of all hues. People became disgusted at those who were not following the Supreme Court's ruling. And so there is, in my optimistic heart, if Trump keeps doing this, he's going to back himself into a public opinion corner. He can and absolutely will, I think, try to defy Supreme Court order. I mean, the fact that he's not bringing not just not bringing Garcia from El Salvador, and I can't remember all his other names, so just Garcia, and apologies to his family. But they're like red penning in crayon or red crayoning New York Times headlines about this, and like crossing out things and saying, illegal alien criminal MS-13 and we're never bringing him back. Sorry, that kind of crap. They're acting like juveniles, just thumbing their nose at the Supreme Court and other courts, and the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, especially. The very stirring opinion by the conservative Reagan-appointed jurist J. Harvey Wilkinson. They are just saying, no, screw it. So I think they're going to do that, but they're not going to get the high fives from the court of public opinion that they think that they're going to get.
But there are various things that the court could do, right? The court could follow up by saying, by facilitate, we require the administration to, and then get more specific about what they're trying to do. I think withhold funds from the incarceration, or proactively,
they can't withhold funds. So they will be more specific. They will be a lot of stirring judgments, and I think you'll see some administration figures being placed in contempt of court.
Yeah, so that's the other thing I was going to say. So, like you said that they don't have any guns, and that's true by design, but they can escalate. Of course, the penalties still need to be imposed or followed through with by the executive branch, but the judiciary can get a lot more granular and specific about what it's requiring in ways that make it increasingly uncomfortable and implausible for anyone to decline. So, yes, you can start holding people in contempt. You can specifically order, marshals to arrest somebody who has been held in contempt, right? And then it really does become a clear, in other words, you can make the violation clearer and clearer and clearer. And I just wonder whether the Supreme Court will do that and should do that, or whether it should just write it out.
I don't think that the contempt citations are going to be where it's at. I can't imagine currently the Supreme Court doing that, but it's possible that I lack imagination to kind of see the next 3 steps ahead, because we're always, every day, it feels like we're in some kind of semi-new territory that we hadn't contemplated previously. So, but I think if the Supreme Court comes down with pretty heavy contempt citations for high-ranking administration officials, that is some showdown territory. And you don't necessarily want to do a showdown if it's going to hasten both really highly politicized conflict. I think John Roberts, Chief Justice, has already come out and criticized the Trump administration for intemperate kind of words about impeaching justices and trying to put pressure on judges who don't act in the way that they want to. Roberts is a very political figure and always has been. Like, his Obamacare decision is a classic of him just trying to invent legal doctrines that no one ever thought existed, because he wants to keep the legitimacy of the court in the public mind and in the bipartisan mind at the same time. And he's very
and look, if you know that, and if Trump knows that, or at least Trump's aides know that, then they can play the court.
Yep.
Right? I mean, if they know that Roberts's main motivation is to maintain the credibility of the court by avoiding an overt clash, then they will just keep, fucking around and saying, oh, we are facilitating the return of these prisoners, because if they ever show up at JFK, then they can come in.
I think
that's a nonsense response, but it's not direct defiance.
I would, crudely guess that instead of looking for citation, contempt citation avenues, Roberts will be looking for how to get as many 9-0 opinions as possible. How do I make this seem? Because it's a 6-3, Republican appointed Supreme Court right now. And so the kind of clown show conservatives like Sean Davis of the Federalist and Elon Musk, of course, whatever, if he's conservative or not, like, we need to impeach justices, or we need to somehow overthrow the Supreme Court. Lord knows what they're saying today. But they've been increasing these attacks for the last couple of weeks. It becomes more difficult to have that gather any kind of groundswell if all the opinions from this 6-3 court are 9-0 in the other direction. So I think that's where Roberts will be spending most of his attention, is corralling those things and then trying to appoint the best writers to write those opinions, because that's hard for Trump to keep weathering. And already his public approval ratings have been sinking really, really fast. Among young people, they've just cratered. It was really high before, but now it's not. Independence down, on the economy down, even on handling of immigration down. He is used to governing as an unpopular president, but that's going to be a lot of unpopularity in a short period of time. So I think the Supreme Court's going to play to that more than they are going to look for kind of artificial shackles placed on him.
So Justice Clarence Thomas can put his feet up while Justice Amy Coney Barrett does all the legwork this term, presumably. So lastly, Matt, what's your sense of dread about the possibility of the United States in the longer than short term, in the medium term, becoming a sort of functionally, I don't want to say authoritarian, but like, I think the risk of it becoming Chile in 1973 or Russia today is very small. But I do think that the risk of it becoming Hungary or Turkey for a while, at least, is not the close to zero that I would have put it at 10 years ago.
Yeah.
How do you think about it?
I remember when Trump got elected, even before he got elected in 2015, when it was clear that he was going to be dominant in Republican politics. I couldn't believe it. I was wrong about that. Been wrong about many things. But once that was clear that his popularity was not going to go away, I remember being in touch with all my friends who worked as foreign correspondents in Central Europe in the 1990s. We covered Viktor Orbán in real time as he was switching from a cosmopolitan, anti-communist, anti-Soviet activist to a nationalist, repudiating all the fancy pants Budapest people around him. I remember that. I was there. We covered Vladimir Mečiar, who has so many commonalities with Trump. He'll be constantly suing journalists. Very funny. Going to parts of Slovakia that no politician ever would think about visiting. Never condescending to people, like actually doing democratic retail politics in a way that elites hate to do oftentimes, but also being very thuggish and crude and politicizing everything and forcing people to kiss the ring and a lot of corruption. Anyways, those of us who covered those people, and there weren't that many of us at the time, we just were in shock. We never ever thought that our country would have politics like that. Like that just seemed like some weird, cheap ass post-commie shit. When you're transitioning from, communism to sort of insecure nationalism and delusions of grandeur, and always like agitating against Brussels and New York and Tel Aviv and Washington, agitating against George Soros. He was a big demon hate figure in all of 1990s Central Europe by nationalist politicians. And to see those things to happen again, that shock, that alarm level, and also just knowing, certainly by the time that Trump got elected, that this 7-decade run was over. It still is something that I think people are only now beginning to really fully appreciate in Europe, and I presume in Australia as well. Like, oh shit, it's really over. Like that Article 5 thing in NATO, that's not really there anymore. The assumptions that we had, this post-World War II world and the institutions that were created as part of it, it's done. I knew it was done then, but now we really know that it's done now. But
it's one thing for NATO to be done. It's one thing for, the US has always had this fuzzy relationship, this weird relationship with the rest of the world. I think probably in my lifetime, starting with the Iraq War, was the beginning of the erosion of faith in the bankability of American truthfulness and commitment to the global world order, the post-war order. But for America itself, domestically, to become a place where people can randomly be snatched off the street and disappeared, that's new and shocking, genuinely shocking.
I would point out that in the second Bush administration, a lot of the kind of debates that we're seeing now, bad debates among the Trumpist right, we saw the Bush-Cheney right. There were battles over habeas corpus then. There were battles over extraordinary rendition of dark sites abroad, of if you're either with us or with the terrorists, or you're giving material aid to the bad guys. Sort of eliding the difference between speech and and actual kind of terrorism and joining the bad guys. Those things happen. It's kind of an irony that the Trumpists who came into power, Trump and Vance in particular, and some other people, they hate the neocons and have smitten them and driven them to the margins of life. And they had it coming in large respect. And sometimes I cheer. When Trump went to South Carolina in the 2016 primary and absolutely trashed the Bush family in front of a heavily military audience, and people cheered. It was like, oh, something new is going on. And I kind of like it because the Iraq War was a disaster. And it deserves to be, hanging on people's neck like a millstone. So that's all good. But now they're just taking the same stupid arguments that we heard. I was just waiting for the torture argument to come around, like it also came in. So we've done some of these things before. They seem to be categorically worse. Now the fight with the Supreme Court is more brazen. I think the corruption associated with Trump is a level that people just didn't contemplate in any recent presidency. And it doesn't even get that much play anymore because there's just too much stuff to pay attention to. But
yeah, and Matt, I heard a legal analyst talking about the difference between the Bush administration and the Trump administration on the human rights front. And she was saying the difference is that the Bush administration really tried to push the law to its limits, but it still respected, it still respected at least the kabuki theater of believing that the law was something worth adhering to. It tied itself in knots trying to figure out legalistic ways of saying that, enhanced interrogation wasn't torture and Guantanamo Bay wasn't in the United States and therefore we can do this and we can do that. Here, there is just a seeming disregard for the question of whether or not legality comes into it. It's like there are bad people. Bad people deserve to have bad things happen to them. We don't need them here. It's really a strongman worldview where, we don't need to give, habeas corpus rights to these nasty people. They're bad hombres. Just get rid of the bad hombres. That strikes me as maybe I'm being hysterical, but as a different level than Cheney's malevolent dark war on the forces of Islamic evil.
I mean, they did robustly try to expand the unitary executive. They had a theory that had been simmering since Watergate, where a lot of those guys cut their teeth, Cheney and Rumsfeld especially, and they wanted to push it both by legal pushing and then by actions that were on the outside. But it is a different scale and a different kind of brazenness and openness and contemptuousness level that we're seeing right now. And I think I'm not ultimately as pessimistic as I think you are at the moment, probably because I'm still American and Californian and very naive about these things. But I have some faith in American public opinion not being with us. I don't think that this is a winner in the long term. I think Trump thinks it is. And I don't agree with him. Yes, we want to deport MS-13 criminals. Absolutely. It's that's a 97-2 issue. It's not even close. Everyone wants that. But that's not what he's doing. He's using it as a test case to say, we don't need to do habeas corpus. We don't need to account for the people that we send to foreign black site prisons. And I just don't think Americans are going to stand for it. It might take a year and a half for the not standing for it to manifest in a way that provides relief to people now. And so that's going to be a real rough 18 months. But I think it's
and you're reminding me that I should take some solace in the fact that the chief characteristic that political scientists look for in determining whether or not a power grab is going to be successful by an authoritarian, in the case of Erdoğan or in the case of Orbán, is do they have a popularity of 70 to 80% before the power grab? And if they do, then we're in trouble. And if they don't, it's pretty difficult to bend the country to their will. So hopefully Trump remains not there. Last question from one of our viewers on Substack Live. Alex says, how did Matt feel about Bill Maher's defensiveness regarding the dinner with Trump?
I will admit I could feel that he wanted to talk about it. So as I said, I think on the show, I thought it was great that he went to the White House, and I thought his report was interesting. And I think that's the right approach. I would go to the White House if they asked me, and I don't like Trump. at all. I'm also not, perhaps slightly less impressed by the gap between his private persona and what he does as president, because I just care about power more than anything else. That said, I could tell he wanted to talk about that. He was still like wound up about it. And so I just poked him very slightly to let it out. It needed to come out. It was going to come out anyways. He wasn't going to be able to fully concentrate until we got that out of the way. And, I'm trying to make a better show. We're trying to do good broadcasting, and him being mad at me is fine. Fine broadcasting. And he wasn't really.
No. I mean, he seems surprisingly thin-skinned about the negative reaction that he's got to that. It seemed like for the first time he's been reading his own comments, and he probably just shouldn't, because I don't think anybody gives a shit that he went to.
Larry David does.
Who Matt does he?
Yeah, Larry David had a piece in the New York Times saying a satirical piece called "My Dinner with Adolf." It was just, it wasn't funny. Sadly, like funny headline, but the rest of it was really kind of cringe-inducing, and it was just like clearly a shot at Bill Maher. Right. So there are people in Maher's universe, I'm sure, giving him a lot of guff for this. And so he feels maybe a little bit defensive about it, but he also feels indignant, like that. No, that's why you fail, is that you don't talk to other people. And that's one of the best things about Bill, through thick and through thin, love him or hate him, whatever, plastics or no plastics, he's going to talk to all sides. And
no, I love the guy. I think it's great that he went. I think you did a great job on the show. I think, but I agree with your diagnosis that simply because a well-known showman is good at being a showman for a few hours doesn't tell you anything about what he's doing, or how we should think about his presidency. So what? He can charm you, right?
On his turf.
Fine. On his turf, exactly.
Yeah.
Matt, it's great to talk to you as always. Come back any old time, and next time I'm in New York City, I look forward to a big night.
I promise that I might wear my stupid AirPods better next time.